So the question is, after what battle was the Emancipation Proclamation made? Lincoln needed to do it after a victory. What battle was more like a draw, but they called it a victory in order to make the Emancipation Proclamation? You saw a video on it yesterday. Come on. Put those thinking caps on. Hats on today for cancer. Get those thinking caps on. Spencer. The Battle of Antietam, yes. It was announced after the Battle of Antietam. In September of 1862. Basically what Lincoln said is, you CSA states, you have 3 months to come back to the Union. You have 3 months to come back. You're given a deadline. 3 months. What happens to those states that rejoin the Union within those 3 months? What do they get as part of this deal? What is their incentive for coming back to the Union? What do they get out of it? If they come back, they keep their slaves, yes. This is not about freeing the slaves. This is a way to get the southern states to rejoin. If you come back within these 3 months, you get to keep your slaves. If you don't, as of what date would they lose their slaves according to Lincoln? What date does this get signed? What date does this go into effect? January 1st, 1863 is correct. So if any southern states rejoin the Union by January 1st, 1863, they will keep their slaves. So, continuing on with the Emancipation Proclamation, where did it free the slaves? In what territory did the Emancipation Proclamation free the slaves? We just did a question about that. Where does the Emancipation Proclamation free the slaves? Yeah. Yeah, in the Confederacy. It only frees the slaves in the Confederacy. In any state whose people are in rebellion against the United States. Minnesota wasn't rebelling against the United States. It was the Confederacy rebelling. So what part of the United States gets to keep their slaves? According to the Emancipation Proclamation, which everybody thinks freed the slaves. Yeah, the border states get to keep their slaves according to the Emancipation Proclamation. Boy, if I was a slave in Maryland, I wouldn't be happy. Everybody's saying, yeah, Lincoln's freeing the slaves. I'm like, I'm still a slave. He did not free the slaves. Now, he did this for a couple reasons. One, he wanted to promote a revolt. He thought maybe the slaves would rise up and fight against their masters. It didn't happen. He thought that the slaves would rise up and there'd be mass panic in the South, but it didn't happen. When this went into effect on January 1st, 1863, exactly how many slaves did Lincoln free with this Emancipation Proclamation? Exactly how many slaves did Lincoln free when this went into effect? Nick? None. Why not? Not sure? Who remembers? Who can help him out? Because we've gone over this already today a couple times. Why doesn't this free any of the slaves? Yes. Lincoln doesn't control any of the states in the Confederacy. And since he's only freeing them in the Confederacy, it's not freeing anybody. That would be like me saying the following. Everybody in Mr. Daniels' classroom right now is free to go home. Are they going to leave? Everybody in Mr. Daniels' room right now, I'm saying in Mr. Daniels' room, his classroom, everybody in there can go home. They are now free. How many people are going to go home as a result? Doug? Right now they're leaving? Because I said so. Do I have any control of Mr. Daniels' classroom? No. So you would go anyway. Well, if you were a slave in the South doing the same thing, you'd be shot. You don't think you'd go. I don't think you'd go either, because I have no control over Mr. Daniels' classroom, just like Lincoln didn't have any control over the CSA. Now, one thing that did change as a result of the Emancipation Proclamation is for the first time, who was allowed in the Union Army? Based on your reading. For the very first time in this war, who was allowed to fight in the Union Army? Well, not slaves, because we're not going to take slaves, even though we do have some in the North, but I think you're missing one word in front of that slave. Yeah. Freed slaves. African Americans are allowed in the Union Army for the first time. Only after the Emancipation Proclamation are African Americans, free African Americans, allowed in the Union Army. Now you will get units of all African American troops fighting for the Union. Now this almost appears to be about slavery, but really it's not. It's still about keeping the Union together. Now's the chance to see who read and who didn't. If the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free the slaves, what did? What freed the slaves? If the Emancipation Proclamation didn't, what freed the slaves in the entire United States? The 13th Amendment. Good. The 13th Amendment freed the slaves. Notice the 13th Amendment comes about in 1865, after the war is done, and after Lincoln has been shot and killed. This happens after Lincoln is dead. Does Lincoln free the slaves? No. It is an amendment. And who remembers what an amendment is? We talked about that way back when we were dealing with the foundation of this country. We talked about that when we were looking at Dred Scott. What is an amendment? Something added to a document. Good. And in this case, we are modifying the Constitution. As I already pointed out, this happens after the war ends. So at that point, is there any Confederacy at the end of this war? Nope. There is no Confederacy. The Confederacy is gone. It abolishes slavery in the United States. And since the war is over, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, all those southern states that used to be in the Confederacy are now part of the United States because the CSA is gone. As a result, all the slaves are free. Who makes and passes an amendment to the Constitution? If it wasn't Lincoln who did this, who freed the slaves? If it wasn't Lincoln, who freed the slaves? Hannah? Congress freed the slaves. Congress passed this amendment, and once Congress passes this amendment, it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. 3/4 of the state legislatures have to ratify it. What does ratify mean? In order for it to be put into effect, 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. Use your context. What would ratify mean? Approve, yeah. 3/4 of the states approved it, and then it became law. The slaves are free, not by the Emancipation Proclamation, but by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. And not by Lincoln, but by Congress and the states. Any questions on the Emancipation Proclamation and freedom for the slaves? Yeah. Because it's a lot easier to say that than to understand how Congress works, how an amendment is made, knowing that all the political stuff, the government portion of it. So it's just easier to say, oh, Lincoln freed the slaves. It's easy to say that because if you don't read the words of the Emancipation Proclamation closely, you miss the point. That's why I had you look at the words specifically to see, hey, any state whose residents or whose people are in rebellion against the United States. Think about it, it's only the Confederacy. It takes a lot more thought to understand that he didn't free the slaves than it is to just accept, oh, he freed the slaves. Make sense? It's dummied down history. At that point, he hadn't freed anybody. Now, as we started taking over southern territories, slaves were becoming free. But Lincoln did not free them when he did the Emancipation Proclamation. And he did not free all of them. As I pointed out, the slaves in the border states remained slaves up until 1865 with the 13th Amendment. Yeah. The Emancipation Proclamation was trying to lure the southern states back. Yeah, because he's the one that wrote it. He knew exactly what he was doing. Because technically he didn't have any power to free the slaves. On the video yesterday it said the only power he had that he could use is by confiscating enemy property. And the property that he was confiscating as commander-in-chief of the army was Southern slaves as they took over the area. As the Constitution says, slaves are property. You can't take away property unless they're a criminal. And so he was calling those criminals. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was not out to free all the slaves because he knew it was impossible under the current law. Did he want to? Probably. But he knew he couldn't legally. So, any other questions? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the remainder of the time.